the story I'm going to tell, I've actually heard little elements of it in several of the stories tonight. And this is a story that took place many years ago in New Brunswick. And back in those days, you always knew when you entered New Brunswick because you would be driving on the highways in Quebec, you'd hit the border, and then all of a sudden it was like hitting a war zone. You would hit potholes and flying debris, and today it's quite different. It's the opposite. I find in Quebec, you're boom, 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 and then you hit the New Brunswick highways, and it's just beautiful. Yeah. This story took place when the highways were in bad shape, and it involves a friend of mine named Chris, and Chris was driving on a particularly bad road. It ran from between Moncton and Shediac, and I think the people in that area must have voted for the wrong political party because these roads were notoriously bad. And Chris had the great misfortune of driving along and hitting a pothole and coming to a quick stop. His car tire was flattened, and although he did have a spare, for some reason he did not have a jack in his car, so he wasn't able to lift the car to change the tire. And it so happened where he hit the pothole, he was in the middle of nowhere. He looked here and there, and he just couldn't see a house, and he just decided he would have to wait for a passing car. But while he was standing there, he happened to notice way up on the hill, there was a barn. And where there's a barn, there is a farmer, and where there's a farmer, there is a solution to any problem. And so he began to walk across the field and up the long field that made up that hill. And as he went up the hill, and the closer and closer he got to that barn, he began to smell something. And at first it was a bad smell. But the closer he got, it became downright offensive. It was overwhelming, but he really needed to get his tire fixed. So he decided he was just going to have to bear with it and get to the farm and get some help. And so he did. He made it to the farm, went to the farmhouse, knocked on the door. And when the door opened, it was a big burly farmer. He had a big bushy beard, and he said, "Can I help you?" And Chris explained the problem and that he needed a jack. And the farmer said, "I have one, no problem." He said, "I'll get it. I'll drive you down. We'll fix you up and you'll be on your way." So the farmer, he went to look for the jack. And Chris just stood there and he just couldn't get over the smell of the place and how bad it was. And while he was waiting, suddenly from around the corner of the house came a little herd of piglets. Group of piglets. I don't know if you call them a herd, but there was a group, and he said, "Of course, it's a pig farm. That's why it smells so bad." It made perfect sense. But as he looked at these pigs, he realized that there was one who had something a little strange about him. He had a wooden leg, a peg leg. And Chris, he just looked at this pig and he thought, this is really strange. So when the farmer came out, he said, "Listen, I have a question for you before we leave." He said, "I'm wondering if you could tell me something about this pig here." The farmer looked at him. "I'll tell you about that there pig." He said, "That pig, last year, my daughter was down at the river swimming. She was alone. She shouldn't have gone in the water. She knew better, but she went into the water and she got herself into trouble. No one there to save her. Surely she would have died, except for that there pig. That pig jumped into the water, grabbed her by the hair, pulled her over to the shore, gave her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, saved her life." Chris said, "You're kidding." He said, "You're telling me that pig saved your daughter's life?" "That's what I'm telling you." Chris said, that's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. That's an incredible pig. You know, it didn't explain the wooden leg. Chris said, "Look, I don't mean to be intrusive, but is there anything else you can tell me about that there pig?" "Oh, I'll tell you about that there pig." He said, "My wife last summer was driving that pig to the veterinarian, had it in the back seat. All of a sudden, she felt a pain in her chest. And the car started going back and forth. All of a sudden, that pig jumped from the back seat into the front, went down, hit the brake, hit the gear into park. He jumped out, flagged down a passing motorist. They called for an ambulance, saved her life. Chris said, that's amazing. He said, you're telling me that pig saved your daughter and your wife's life? That's the most amazing pig I've ever heard of. But you know, it still didn't explain that wooden leg. So Chris said, look, I really don't mean to intrude, but is there nothing else that you could tell me about that pig? Oh, I'll tell you about that there pig. He said, in the spring, I was putting a new roof on the barn, you know, the big metal sheets that you put on the barns these days. And he said, and I was almost finished and it started to rain. It was a downpour. And he said, I didn't have time to get to the end. I slipped. I come down. It was like coming down a water slide, Disney World. He said, I was coming down. I surely would have died, except for that there pig. That pig had the wherewithal to grab a wheelbarrow in the yard filled with hay, ran it over right to where I landed. I landed right in that little wheelbarrow full of straw, and I bounced out, saved my life. Chris said, you're kidding me. He said, so you're telling me that pig saved your life, your wife's life, and your daughter's life? That's the most amazing pig I've ever heard of. But you know, it still didn't explain that wooden leg. Finally, Chris said, look, I don't mean to be offensive, he said, and if you don't want to answer this question, it's fine. He said, but what I really want to understand is, why does that pig have a wooden leg? Farmer said, oh, that. He said, well, a pig that amazing, you wouldn't have us eat them all at once, would you?